This little device turned my FX30 into a full-frame cinema camera and changed how I felt about my filmmaking instantly. But stick around because it wasn't that simple. Me and my trusty sidekick. I'm honestly not the biggest fan of talking about gear. I think so much of the success and failure of any film project is based on technique and knowledge and taste. But when I find something that genuinely changes the way that I shoot, I talk about it. This is the Metabones EF to ET Super Speed Booster. Speed Booster Ultra, because that matters. Takes an image circle and squeezes it down by a factor of 0.71 onto the smaller sensor, essentially turning my FX30 into a full frame FX3. The first lens that I used this on was my Tokina. Now the Tokina 28-70 ATX Pro 2 is kind of a legendary lens within the retro lens community. Essentially there was a period of time where Ingenue, known for their cinema zooms and cinema primes and like high-end glass, was getting their glass made by Tokina in the mid 90s. So basically there was a period of time where Ingenue glass was ending up in this wacky Tokina little photo lens. This lens has a really creamy fall off. It's very sharp in the middle, but it descends pretty quickly into non-contrasty images. The glass is really, really nice, and it's kind of unique, you know, like when everybody started shooting with Canon L series glass on Blackmagic cameras, all of a sudden everybody's footage started to look the same. So I think finding a lens that's kind of unique to your kit can help set your work apart. But it's a 28-70, and on a crop sensor like the ASPC, like the FX30, at 70, you're basically at 100, and at 28, you're pretty much at a 35 or a 40. I never really felt like I could get wide enough. But then with this, the wide end of the field of view basically turns it into like an 18. It ends up being like an 18 to 55. And I love that focal length range because you can do so much with it. You can get those big establishing wides, you can get those longer shots. You do lose autofocus with this, but honestly, I wouldn't be getting this if you're trying to use autofocus in the first place, just frankly. It does get some wacky flares, but I'll explain in a second. You know, most of the Canon lenses, which are the majority of the EF mount market, are made to fit full frame because a lot of the higher end cameras captured photos at full frame. So when you're shooting video, it's usually cropping in on the sensor. So the lenses actually have a lot of room in the image circle that's not being used. So I stuck this on my Canon L series 16 to 35 f4, and dude, it's like a 10. It's like a 10 to 18. It's super wide. And I've got some footage to compare it, like my wife doing her nails. I have the 16 to 55 f2.8 for my Sony, and that's an ASPC specific lens at 16. And then this is the Canon 16 to 35 at 16 millimeters with the speed booster. Obviously, you're just getting a huge amount of range with the visuals that you can capture, giving off really strong Revenant vibes. Here's the thing. If you're renting cinema lenses, be sure you have support for this. I did have some issues putting on the Tokina and trying to change the iris really fast. I think part of that's just like it being a really old lens. It would stall and I'd have to turn off the camera and unscrew it and screw it back on. But it does provide a really unique look for your work, which is kind of cool because it's hard to make things stand out nowadays. Like I remember when everybody started shooting with the Canon L series glass, like on the Blackmagic cameras, and everything just started to look the same and homogenized. And then it happened with the Sigmas, you know, the 18 to 35 on the Blackmagic cameras as well. And now I feel like the same thing is happening with the Sony cameras. With the Sony cameras and their lenses, and everybody's picking up the FX3 and the Sony 24-70, and it's like it all kind of starts to look the same to me. This is something that helps your work stand apart. And you know, sometimes that's the goal. Like sometimes you want your work to look artistically different, and other times you don't. Other times you're trying to convince a business to hire you to shoot their video. They don't want to see some wacky tilt shift focus lens. I did try to use the Lens Baby 35 point focus lens that I used on that music video, which check out that video right here. And it was just way too much. It was just so wacky. I mean, that lens is weird to begin with. This was a whole nother level. But I told you about those flares, and here's what I actually had to do. I got it, and initially I couldn't focus beyond 3 feet, like no matter the focal length. And so it was totally messed up. So I actually had to go in and unscrew the back. I had to unscrew this screw right here and manually unscrew the back element further out so that we could actually see what was in focus at infinity or even at like 12 feet. So there are some quirks to this for sure, but it does create a really unique look. I found like some random Russian YouTuber who was doing it in really broken English, and it worked. So Yay for Russian YouTube. Even if you don't have this though, I think the FX30 is a really great bang for your buck. Even at ASPC, you can get a lot of lenses that are actually the price of this metabones, and they look pretty decent. And as long as you're training yourself how to expose and how to frame and how to tell a story, gear is less important than those things. The success or failure of any film comes down to technique, taste, location, performance. Honestly, the technicals are important, but they're not as important as what they're capturing. Thanks for watching.